How would you describe your time as Portland City Administrator?
Exciting, hard, unpredictable, and for me, incredibly gratifying.
How are you feeling now leaving?
A little anxious. I've been doing this for pretty much 41 straight years with only a small break before I came to the city of Portland. And so it'd be interesting how I feel waking up 5 o'clock on Monday morning after Friday the 2nd. So.
What do you believe you fixed during your time in this role?
Fixed. That's an interesting word. I think my biggest contribution was to get the city through a restructuring that would allow a new city administrator to feel comfortable that they could manage the organization and that they could feel comfortable being held accountable for the organization. And that just wouldn't have been the case under the old structure with 26 bureaus and offices. They would have all reported directly to his office, and that was just untenable. And so I think anybody who had an experience as being a city manager would have looked at that and known that coming in, they would have had to restructure the organization. And that's always a difficult thing to do because you end up, quite frankly, making a number of people unhappy no matter how well you do it. And it's hard to survive doing that big a change in an organization. And so I figured I should do it and set the table. It doesn't mean that when Raymond comes in, there will be many things he'll want to change when he gets here, but at least he won't have to do a wholesale restructuring of city government.
Are you happy with your job? Do you think you did a good job setting the table for him?
I think so. I think the city is ready for the city manager to come, a city administrator to come in and be in charge and be accountable. It obviously it's still a work in progress. There's a whole nother wave of change we're doing this year, kind of more down in the weeds change than the big structural things. But that'll be a constant here. But I feel good about where the city is, and I think it's ready for its new city administrator.
What problems are you leaving unresolved, and why?
Well, no secret to anybody. The city has some serious structural fiscal problems. Some of those are the nature of local government finance in Oregon. Some of those are the fact that we are running a number of programs that didn't exist 5 years ago, most in response to the homeless crisis. We funded those programs initially with one-time money, different federal flows, some state money and some metro money, and those sources have dried up, and so there will be some significant challenges for the next few years in the budget. And then the last one is that there's a structural gap between our revenue base, our standard revenue structure, and the cost of running this, primarily due to personnel, increased costs, healthcare, retirement, negotiated settlements with unions. And so the total cost of employees is going up faster than our revenue is going up. So that's another structural problem that the city faces. I did not solve that. And so the city for the next few years is going to have to restructure some of its work and think about the longer term. The other challenge the city faces, which also is no secret, is that we have a pretty significant deferred maintenance problem with from infrastructure to buildings, most of our facilities, and we're going to have to face that in the next 5 to 10 years. That's going to be a big challenge.
If you had to point to one thing that you regret, what would it be?
Regret. I try not to exercise regret. There's not much point in it. But, when we were making decisions pre this year for getting ready for the new council, new mayor, one of the big questions with every decision was, how much do we bake it and how much do we let the new council and mayor get their fingerprints on it. And if I had to do it over again, I'd probably leave more things unbaked and allow the council and mayor to get their fingerprints on things. I think they felt like we made too many decisions for them when they first showed up. And so, that's 2020 hindsight. It would have been hard to predict, but that's one thing I would have done differently.
Give me an example.
Well, the budgets for council offices. The council felt constrained by what we had decided in the budget. They pretty quickly, when they got on board, adjusted their budgets and gave themselves more resources to do what they felt they needed to do in their job. I think that was perfectly appropriate. We did kind of under-resource their offices, and that was a function both of having a different governing body make that decision, but also we were under some degree of fiscal stress in that budget too. And so Mayor Wheeler was pretty famous for saying, if they want to change the budget when they get here, they can do that. And they did. So, that was one thing that we could have probably predicted differently that would have made it maybe a more smooth entry.
Did political pressure from elected leaders ever interfere with day-to-day management decisions?
I wouldn't characterize that as ever happening. On the other hand, we do our work in a political environment. Our bosses are political players. Their interests are political to a very great degree. So when we make decisions as an administration, we don't make decisions in a vacuum. We understand that the community we serve is a political body. And so the folks we work for on the council and the mayor, they are a representation of the politics of the city. And so it would be, I think, disingenuous to say, oh, we make all our decisions completely aside from politics. That's not true. But I don't think I've ever felt political pressure about administrative decisions.
So you agreed to stay on to help throughout the government transition. Can you describe what that was like from your perspective? Did the new form of government make your job harder or even impossible at times?
I think the very nature of the change that created the job of city administrator and the fact that there is a delineation about the management of the organization certainly made my job easier and clearer from when I was the chief administrative officer under the old form of government. So that has been, I think, a big improvement for how the job can be done more effectively. And I will say, there's a lot of ambiguity right now in the relationship between the administration, the mayor as the executive, and the council as legislative body. And that ambiguity is causing some challenges in doing the job well. It's getting better. It's slow. I think one thing that I think everyone's kind of come to the conclusion here lately, last 3 or 4 months, is that we need more commonly accepted rules of engagement. As by way of example, how does a counselor's idea as a legislator move from idea to a piece of legislation that the full council can deliberate on clearly, make a decision, and that the administration feels comfortable that it can be implemented? And we don't quite have a process yet that's clear to everybody about how that works. So we're getting there, and we actually have a staff committee of all the different groups working on some options about how those rules might be more solidified so that everybody has a common understanding of how that process works.
That seems like a pretty basic thing though, right?
Well, it does. On the other hand, we have 13 elected officials who came in feeling like they had they felt like they had an individual mandate from their constituency, either a district or the folks that they feel like voted for them, to do what they felt was the right thing to do. And they came in trying to exercise that. Well, trying to coalesce 13 elected officials' idea of what a good process to go from idea to legislation is a little tougher task than one might think. And it doesn't matter if we say, as the administration, here are the rules, here's how we do this. And they say, well, I don't want to do those things. I want to do it a different way. So it really is ineffective unless we come to agreement on what those rules are and then hold each other accountable for following those rules. And that's it's an agreement that you have to come to. And I think what people forget, because it is fairly easy to pit the branches against each other and the administration against the electeds. What people forget is this is a team sport. No one of those branches can be successful without the others. And so I think, we're getting there. We've been bumping into each other a little bit. It's kind of been ugly once in a while. But I think it's getting better, and people are coming to those conclusions that we really do have to work closely together to be the most effective we can be for Portlanders.
Yeah, I think some would say this new council came in a little hot, for better.
A little
or
hot,
for
yeah.
worse.
And understandably so. The charter change that happened in 22, that vote, that was the 8th or 9th time I think Portlanders had voted for a charter change. They had resoundingly defeated the previous attempts. This one, by today's standards, was a resounding win, 58+%. And I will tell you, the general perception was not that Portlanders necessarily loved ranked choice voting, but they were generally upset with the performance of City Hall. And so this new cohort of elected officials, I think it's perfectly understandable that they would come in with the idea that, you guys have been running this place and it's broken. And we've got ideas about how to fix it. And so they did come in a little hot, understandably.
Yeah, that makes sense. Was there a time you can remember where council priorities conflicted with city management priorities?
Not necessarily not from a policy perspective. I think where we have bumped into each other more than anything else is our attempts to make sure legislation was framed in a way that it could be implemented. It didn't present undue legal risk to the city. It didn't present undue logistics and financial hardship to actually implement it. And that's a hard conversation to have when the legislators and the legislature's interest is the policy issue, and we're here kind of saying, wait, this might be really hard to implement, or it might even present a legal risk to the city that we need to be concerned about. And so the back and forth on that has been kind of challenging.
Sure. So it's forecasted that next year the city will face a $66 million shortfall in the general fund. From your experience, what areas is the city overspending that could take cuts?
Well, they call it the general fund for a reason. The funds within the general fund are generally used for anything the council wishes to use it for. So I would not characterize what we are doing today as overspending. The council adopted this budget. They allocated priorities the way they saw fit back in June of last year. And I think that deficit will present some really challenging things for the council regarding the portfolio of services that are in the general fund. You and I have talked about this before. There are really kind of three big rocks. There's public safety, there's parks, and there's homeless services. Those are the big rocks. Homeless services have been, as we've discussed, generally funded with one-time money, year after year after year, one time, not much ongoing. There are also some significant challenges in public safety, mostly regarding overtime, that have been funded year after year after year with one-time money. Parks, we dodged a bullet. The voters said, we love our parks, and they gave parks a substantial increase in levy dollars. That will be both, blessing and curse. You've got a lot more money, that's great. Now you have to figure out how to deliver service in the way Portlanders expect by giving you this big raise in revenue. So there are challenges there too, but I wouldn't say the council's overspending money on anything. However, we are going into a few years, not just this coming year, of really challenging decisions that are going to have to be made within the general fund because of those one-time funds. And what came out with the economists' forecast earlier this week is, I would say, the tip of the iceberg. It doesn't take into account the fact that we haven't done a current service level escalation of costs for next year. That will come out in probably February from the city budget office. There'll be a current service level budget, which means if you did everything you did today and you escalate the costs to next year, how much will it be? That number, vis-a-vis the revenue number that the economists came out with, and taking into account those one-time revenues that would fall off June 30, the gap is going to probably be larger.
Let's talk transportation and PBOT. So we know with much of the revenue from the transportation funding bill down in Salem now on pause, how will this impact PBOT and Portland roads?
Well, by the numbers, it's about $11 million in the current budget. We had assumed that would pass. The city was due to get approximately $22 million for a full fiscal year from the package. So we baked in about $11 million that would have started January 1st this year. That's not going to happen. And so we're looking at how do we retrench on that $11 million in the current year. And then in the future year, next year, that's about a $22 million hole, I guess, that we will have to wait to see what happens with a referendum. So there won't be any money for the next calendar year for sure. The November election, we'll know then if we get any money in January. So a lot of ambiguity has been put into the PBOT budget. What it means for maintenance is that even more stress than we've had previously. I think we are at a place where PBOT will be looking at every other program it does for cost savings before maintenance. We're at a crossroads when it comes to maintenance, and your viewers may know this, but roads deteriorate at a exponential rate. They don't deteriorate on a linear rate. Once you get to a certain place with the deterioration of a road, it almost falls off a cliff. And you can't just put an overlay on it anymore. You have to dig the whole thing up and rebuild it, and it is a huge cost. And we're right at that place in a number of roads, and so we will need to devote as much as we can to road maintenance to keep from falling off the cliff on some major roads around the city. I also know that the mayor and the council are looking at what can we do locally that doesn't just depend on the gas tax. And so I think there'll be a really, I'll say vigorous conversation about what can the city do to raise revenue for maintenance specifically.
Do you anticipate staff cuts at PBOT?
Yes.
Roughly how many?
I don't know.
Okay, so there's no solution for that $11 million gap?
They have thought through that. I think there will be probably minor staff cuts this year, and we're doing already across the city, including PBOT. We've ordered the hold on all vacancies, so we're not replacing people unless they're essential, and so those are being reviewed both at HR and by the budget office on a continual basis. It's obvious that 24/7 operation of the wastewater treatment plant and an operator retires, we're probably going to replace the operator. But support staff, people working in the office, that we're going to hold those. And so we're doing a lot of that citywide, and PBOT's part of that. So there are techniques we're doing already this year to try and make sure we're saving money.
Okay, let's talk homelessness. The city continues to fight to find a way to clean up our streets and help those suffering, but it's still a problem. What, from your perspective, is getting in the way?
Well, there's no one thing that is getting in the way. I think the city and the county and this, I don't know, for good or ill, both entities being in pretty significant fiscal stress is going to force both entities to come together and really examine the entire system, both from expenditures to keep people in housing before they lose it, how we deal with them when they are on the street. Deal with them is a bad term, but how do we keep people in shelter? How do we take care of their needs, whether it's mental health or addiction issues? How do we do that? And then, to avoid just warehousing people, how do we get them back into housing? And so those are expenditures that happen across a continuum. And I think it's going to force both entities to just take a really serious look at what are the most effective techniques. We've got data. We know which kinds of shelters do people move through and into housing best. Also, the people who are without housing are of a broad demographic. Do we prioritize families with children? Do we prioritize folks with mental illness? How do we prioritize folks so we make sure we're getting the best bang for the buck across the whole system? Those are hard questions that I think we've danced around the edges of them, but we haven't really had to tackle them really hard. We're going to have to this year. And I know that process is already underway with staff from the county and the city trying to do that kind of an assessment. But it's going to be a really big challenge. And I would say overall it will be difficult to operate this system on an ongoing basis at the same level of service.
Is that city-county relationship when it comes to homelessness getting any better?
I think it's a lot better than it was 18 months ago.
Okay.
18 months ago, we weren't talking to each other that much. At least there are now tables that electeds come to. There's a table that implementers, the staffs, come to. There's a table for the community to come together. And at least there's a discussion going on. 18 months ago, we weren't talking to each other in a real way. And so that's a big plus. I think we have a lot more data than we had 18 months ago that's real. You can look at it and say, oh my goodness, we kind of know what's happening now. Having said all of that, I would be remiss if I didn't say that the city and the county cannot solve this problem on their own. This problem is a structural problem based on the economy, based on the fact that American capitalism and American democracy are not distributing power and wealth, they're concentrating it. And because of that, the people at the margin, at the lower end of the economic scale, that margin is growing. And we've got 7,000 people-ish on the street in Multnomah County. There are 70,000 people that are one broken arm, one broken down car, one paycheck away from being on the street. And until we deal with that, we will continue to treat this symptom of an economic ill.
Why does that hit you?
Because it's avoidable. Not by decisions made by the city and county. These are just bigger issues that are resolvable, but it's going to take this country coming to grips with the fact that this isn't working.
It's just going to get worse.
It is.
Yeah. You recently said the mayor's shelter system is sucking up a lot of money. Would you say the mayor is spending too much money on a crisis that many argue will never be solved?
No.
Okay.
I mean, what I just talked about earlier is an important issue. The crisis on the street is an urgent issue. And, what we had 450 people die on the streets in 24 or 23, I can't remember. And so, no, we're not spending too much money on it. Our problem is the money we're spending isn't as effective as we hope. We need to get more value out of the dollars we spend. And we have to understand that we are treating a symptom of a much deeper problem. And perhaps our approach needs to be a little bit different.
Is this the most painful issue that you've had to?
I think so.
Yeah. How does that wear on you day after day?
Well, I think it wears on all of us. It certainly wears more on the people who have to deal with it every day on the street. We have, providers and our staff and police officers and PSR and mental health professionals, outreach workers, and they have to deal with it every day. So it's hard.
Yeah, I hear you. I guess what kind of discussions are you having with the incoming administrator regarding money for homelessness? I
haven't had any discussions with Raymond about that specifically. We have had discussions about the overall fiscal nature of what he's going to walk into. And that will be challenging, but he's a professional. He knows his business. He's been through, budgetary cycles where you've had to make hard decisions. So he'll bring his professionalism to that, and that will be helpful for the city.
Any advice that you've given him?
Keep your balance. This work and these kinds of challenges are both really hard, but they're also incredibly seductive. They'll suck every minute of every day, 365, out of you, and it will want more. And so if you're going to do this for the long haul and do it well, you have to keep your balance. You need to have a family. You need to have hobbies. You need to travel. You need to do something besides this, because it will suck every minute of every day. And that's a good thing to have that passion for it, but you can't do it for the long haul, 365 every minute of every day, and be good at it. So I tell people, and not just Raymond, professionals who are in this public service business all the time, that if you want to do it for the long term, you gotta keep your balance.
And just lastly, what's next for you?
A lot of nothing. I have a lot of friends. I'm a little longer in the tooth than most people that retire, and so I've had a lot of friends already make that transition, and they've basically said pretty universally, don't plan anything for 6 months. Just be and find a new rhythm to life. And like I said, I'm a little anxious about that first Monday morning at 5 o'clock, and where am I going to go? What am I going to do? But my lovely and talented bride has been an unbelievable partner through practically all of this 41 years. And, we're going to find a whole new relationship together, and I'm looking forward to that.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks for all your hard work.
Thank you.
Yeah.